There once was a great warrior whose name was George. George went around doing good deeds for his fellow man. He protected the innocent and the weak and the poor. One year, however, a new emperor was appointed as ruler over the whole land. He was a wicked ruler, and he wanted to destroy all the churches. He ordered George and his fellow knights to kill anyone who professed to believe in God. This tormented George greatly in his mind. He wondered just how he could fulfill his duty as a knight and at the same time be able to follow this heinous order. In the end, George knew that he could not follow both the king and his conscience at the same time. And so he went to return all his armor and his weapons of war back to the emperor. He told the emperor, "I cannot and no longer, in good conscience, be a knight." But the emperor's reaction was surprising. He was infuriated with George. How could one of his bravest and most noble warriors refuse to follow his order? And as an example, he bound George's hands and his feet, had him taken outside the city walls and beat with iron rods until his bones were broken to pieces, and then left to die. George lied there in excruciating pain. He could barely move his lips to plead for mercy from God. And while he prayed, an angel of light appeared to him, tended to his wounds until his bones were made whole. And that angel then dressed him in new armor. He gave him bright and shining armor, his helmet, his boots, a belt, breastplate, and a shield to protect him. He also gave him weapons, a spear and a sword. Then out from the east came a beautiful white, glimmering horse. The angel told George to mount it, ride on to protect all the innocent and the poor. Now, under the wicked leadership of the new emperor, all the land had become a dark and loathsome place. Where there was once thriving and prosperous cities, there now was cities that were full of civil discord and strife. People no longer wanted to help one another. They did not reach out to share their talents and their gifts for each other. Instead, there were divisions and hatred and even violence that broke out between them. In the emperor's own city, there once was a pristine and crystal clear lake out beyond the city walls. But now that lake had been corrupted by a terrible dragon. The lake was boggy, filthy, dirty, and stinky swamp. And when the dragon was hungry, he would emerge from the boggy depths and roar, and he would lunge toward the city, breathe out his fiery flames from his nostrils and spewed forth his venom from his mouth, looking for vulnerable prey to eat. Of course, the emperor had enlisted his army to go up against this dragon, but his army was nothing compared to the strength and the massive dragon. Whatever weapons that were thrown toward him, they were incinerated in his flames. There was nothing that seemed to be done, could be done. The people thought up another plan. They thought that maybe they could appease the dragon. And so every day they would take out 2 of their most innocent lambs and place at the swamp. And when the dragon was hungry, would awaken and see the lambs and eat them. If the people did this, the dragon left them alone in their peace. But after some time, it became apparent that they could not do this forever. They did not have enough sheep in their flocks to be able to satisfy the bottomless pit of the dragon's stomach. So they went to the king and they said, "What can we do?" And the king made a new law. He said that the only way to appease this dragon is to have a lottery. And that's the only fair way, to put every child's name into a basket. And then I shall draw the name out, and whether rich or poor, whosever name is drawn will be sacrificed to the dragon. Now the people were horrified at this, but they could say nothing, or if they did, the emperor would kill them. So each wrote down their children's name on a piece of paper, and they put it into a basket. Finally, the day came when the king would draw out a name from that basket. The king drew the name out and then handed the little piece of folded paper to his counselor for it to be read. And when the counselor read the name, why, the emperor was shocked. It was his own daughter, the princess. He was filled with torment and grief and horror. "No, no," he said to the people, "not the princess. I will give you all my gold and silver if you preserve my daughter's life and send someone else in her place." Why, the people were angry, and they shouted out in protest. "You made the law," they said, "and you would have had one of our sons and daughters be sacrificed to the dragon. And now you refuse to follow your own law. If you do not bring your daughter forth, we shall burn your house down, and no one in your family will survive as justice." When the emperor could see that the people would not be satisfied, would not bend their wishes, he then asked them if he just had 8 days more to be with his daughter. The people had mercy, and they said, "You have 8 days to say your goodbyes, and then we will be back for her." After 8 days, people returned. They said to the king, the emperor of all the land, "The day of your accountability has arrived. Bring your daughter to the swamp." The emperor brought his daughter out from her room, She was dressed in a beautiful white wedding gown. He had told her that he had wished that one day she might marry and have her own family to raise with a noble and brave knight. But now all this dream has been dashed and consumed by the terrible dragon. He led her to the swamp, and he said, "My dear princess, it should be me that stays here and die, not you." But the princess knelt down before her father. She said, "Give me your blessing." He gave her a blessing. Then he abandoned her to the dragon. Her face, with tears, went into her hands as she began to sob in fear for her life. And while she did so, she heard someone singing, "A knight will I become, a warrior brave and pure, that to thee good honor, a victory be sure. Who shall be mine example, whose arm is swift and strong? The image in my shield doth to Michael belong." The princess took her hands off her face, and she looked up. And there before her was a beautiful white horse, and upon it sat a knight with shining armor. It was George. George dismounted from his horse, and he knelt down before the princess. And he said, "Dear princess, why are you crying here?" "No, never mind," she said. "Just leave. It's too dangerous here." "No, I will not leave until you tell me why you were crying." The princess, through her tears, explained to him the awful predicament that their city was in, and that she had been brought here as a sacrifice for the dragon to save her people. George, when he heard this, stood up, and he said, "Fear not, my dear princess. On this day you will not die. I shall save you." "No," she said, "you cannot. You must leave at once. The dragon is too powerful. Already the emperor has set his army against it, to no avail. If you choose to stay here and fight, you have chosen to die with me." George mounted his horse. He pulled his spear into his hand. Then he said, "Nothing, my dear princess, is impossible with God. Let us go with faith." And he called to God for help. Then he stood before the swamp with bravery. Immediately, the swamp began to boil and froth, and out of its midst came two red eyes, when suddenly the dragon lurched out of the boggy depths. Flames from his nostrils, smoke encircling George on his horse. George, his armor was shining bright, and was because the angel had given him this armor that protected him. he was not harmed. Then he threw his weapon as hard as he could toward the dragon. No other weapon had ever been able to penetrate the dragon. But George's spear flew through the air like a shooting star. It penetrated the dragon's wing, and immediately the dragon fell to the ground, screaming in pain. Finally, when the dragon settled down and began to whimper, George called to the princess. He said, "Bring your white sash, drape it around the dragon's thick neck, and lead him to the city to the people." The princess, with her trembling hands, walked up bravely to the dragon. She draped over her dainty sash round the neck and tied it snugly. And then she gave it a little tug. The dragon stood up and meekly followed her toward the city. George led the way, and while they approached the city, the people saw the dragon coming. They were terrified. They thought that the dragon was coming to devour them, and they fled in fear, trying to hide from his wrath. George and the princess with the dragon went into the city's courtyard, and he raised his sword into the air, and he said to the people, "Fear not! Come out from your hiding places and bow down here on the ground and call upon the God of heaven for mercy. Have courage, for on this day I shall slay the dragon." And when the people could see the dragon helpless and meek, they began to gradually and slowly come out from their hiding places. They came out into the courtyard, and they bowed down, and they pleaded for mercy from the God of heaven above. And then George took his sword, and he slew the dragon. The people were overjoyed. They jumped up, and they were overcome with happiness and relief. It took 6 pair of oxen to drag that massive carcass outside the gates of the city to be burned to ash. Of course, the emperor was thrilled that his daughter had been rescued, and he was even more astonished who had rescued her, that it was George, the very one he had beaten with rods. He asked for George's forgiveness, and then he offered him all his gold and silver for what he had done. But George refused. He said, "Take the gold and the silver and rebuild all the churches that you have destroyed, and make schools for the children to learn. And if you do this, why, peace and prosperity will return to the land." And the emperor, now humble, did what George requested. And a church, a great church that was built like a beautiful temple in the middle of his city. And the swamp returned to its pristine condition. All the land was green and beautiful again. George married the beautiful princess right in that temple in the middle of the city. Within the temple there was a fountain of water placed. It was beautiful and clear. Anyone who should drink of it would have their infirmities and their illnesses healed. That is the story of St. George and the Dragon, retold by Stephen Cook.